Welcome to Parental Alienation and Narcissism. This program is to provide awareness, educational topics that will help you heal and navigate through the hardships associated with narcissistic alienation. Please like and subscribe.
Welcome to Video 8. My name is J. Claude McDaniel, author and victim of alienation. I share my experiences, education, and provide valuable information that I hope will help you navigate through your plight. In this 9th episode, I take you from explaining the tactics used against targets and victims to the long-term pattern that nobody sees. The secret tactics used against targets and victims. When Alex first noticed the change, it was so subtle he almost dismissed it. A text message that took longer to answer. A hug that felt a little shorter than usual. A comment from one of his children that sounded strangely rehearsed, as though it belonged to someone else. Something about it felt off. But Alex convinced himself he was imagining things. Children change. Teenagers become more independent. Families evolve after divorce. He told himself these were simply growing pains. What he didn't realize was that he had already stepped into a battle he couldn't yet see. A battle that wasn't fought openly. A battle that didn't announce itself. A battle designed to slowly reshape the relationship between a parent and child without either of them fully understanding what was happening. That is the nature of parental alienation. It rarely arrives like a storm. It arrives like erosion. Slow, quiet, almost invisible. The process often begins with small criticisms. Comments whispered when the targeted parent isn't present. A sarcastic remark. A dismissive observation. A subtle suggestion that mom or dad isn't quite as caring, responsible, or trustworthy as they appear. No single comment changes everything. But repetition changes perception. And perception eventually becomes belief. Alex also noticed something else. Communication began breaking down. Phone calls became shorter. Messages went unanswered. Important events somehow slipped through the cracks. Invitations never arrived. Family visits became less frequent. Then disappeared altogether. At first, these incidents seemed random. But over time they formed a pattern. A pattern designed to reduce connection and increase distance. The more disconnected Alex became, the easier it became for others to define him. Conversations with his children began feeling different as well. More guarded. Less natural. Sometimes he sensed that his words were being filtered through someone else's interpretation before they reached his children. Later, he would learn that some of his conversations had been monitored, discussed, and reinterpreted after the fact. Words intended to comfort were reframed as manipulation. Expressions of concern were portrayed as control. Acts of love were transformed into evidence against him. Then came conflict. Arguments Alex barely remembered became permanent features in the family narrative. Small disagreements evolved into defining moments. Minor misunderstandings were repeated so often they took on a life of their own. Over time, the image his children held of him began changing. Not all at once, but gradually. The complexity disappeared. The years of love, the sacrifices, the memories, the laughter. All of it began fading behind a growing narrative that portrayed him as the source of every problem. One of the most confusing signs appeared whenever Alex asked why his children seemed angry. The answers were often vague. General accusations. Broad conclusions. Strong emotions attached to surprisingly few specifics. There was certainty, but very little evidence. And that became one of the clearest warning signs. Because when resentment grows stronger than the reasons supporting it, something deeper may be happening. By the time Alex understood these tactics, significant damage had already been done. But understanding gave him something he desperately needed. Perspective. Because once you recognize the tactics, you stop blaming yourself for every unexplained change. You begin seeing the larger pattern. And the larger pattern reveals a difficult truth. Alienation isn't usually one event. It's a campaign. And campaigns are designed to unfold over time. In the part B of this episode, we'll explore how that campaign evolves over years into a pattern that nobody sees. The long-term pattern nobody sees. Looking back, Alex could finally see what had been hidden in plain sight. The distance hadn't appeared overnight. The resentment hadn't suddenly emerged. The relationship hadn't collapsed in a single moment. It happened piece by piece, month by month, year by year. What Alex originally viewed as normal childhood development was often something else entirely. A long-term campaign that had begun years before he recognized it. Before the divorce was finalized. Before adolescence complicated family relationships. Before adulthood hardened emotional distance into something far more difficult to repair. The process was gradual. Which is exactly why it was so effective. Every small incident appeared insignificant on its own. A missed call. A changed schedule. An unexplained coldness. A strange accusation. A family event that somehow never included him. Each event seemed too minor to cause alarm. But together they formed a pattern. And patterns tell stories. As Alex examined his own experiences, he began tracing a timeline. Moments that once seemed unrelated suddenly connected. The confusion made sense. The emotional distance made sense. Even the contradictions made sense. Because parental alienation often works through accumulation. One doubt becomes two. Two become 10. And eventually a child begins questioning a relationship they once trusted completely. What makes alienation especially dangerous is that it doesn't necessarily end when childhood ends. Many targeted parents believe adulthood will automatically bring clarity. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. Alienation can resurface during college years. Major life transitions. Marriage. The birth of children. Even retirement. Every significant milestone creates new opportunities for old narratives to reappear. The stories may change. The themes often remain the same. That realization was painful for Alex. Because it meant the struggle wasn't limited to childhood. The effects could last decades. Unless the underlying narrative was challenged. Yet understanding the pattern also brought something unexpected. Hope. Because patterns can be recognized. And recognized patterns can be interrupted. The same process that slowly created confusion can eventually begin unraveling it. Questions emerge. Contradictions appear. Memories resurface. And adults often begin re-examining stories they accepted as children. Not because someone forced them to, but because life experience gives them a new perspective. Alex eventually understood something important. He had not lost his children all at once. He had lost them a piece at a time. Through whispers. Through omissions. Through subtle distortions. Through stories repeated often enough to sound true. But if those beliefs were built over time, they could also be questioned over time. Truth has a remarkable way of resurfacing. Especially when it is supported by consistency, patience, and unconditional love. The most important lesson from this chapter is simple. Alienation is not a single betrayal. It is a chronic campaign. A long game designed to reshape relationships through perception rather than reality. Recognizing the signs early is not merely helpful. It can be life-changing. Because the longer false narratives survive, the more difficult they become to challenge. And the longer relationships remain fractured, the harder they can be to repair. But difficult is not the same as impossible. As this story continues, we'll move from recognizing the damage to exploring the roles and healing. How do parents begin rebuilding trust? How do children separate truth from manipulation? And how do families reclaim relationships that seemed permanently lost? Those questions lead us into the next episode. While alienation may take years to build, healing can begin the moment truth starts breaking through the fog. This ends part 9 of my narration. Part 10 will be speaking to the roles and healing. Thank you for reviewing my site and listening to part 9. Please like, subscribe, and comment. It helps this valuable site to grow and spread sound educational information. Sincere thanks, J. Claude McDaniel.